Following demands by angry protesters, the ousted Egyptian president is summoned for interrogation. This follows Hosni Mubarak decrying what he calls an unjust campaign against him. So, would a trial appease those worried about a counter-revolution in Egypt, or might it further strain relations between the army and the people? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. The Egyptian Public Prosecutor General has issued an order to summon former President of Egypt, Hosni Mubarak, and his two sons, Allah and Gamal, for questioning into allegations of corruption. Just hours earlier, Mubarak had made his first public statement since his dramatic departure from office. He denied being involved in corruption and he denied having financial assets in foreign countries. For his part, the public prosecutor said Mubarak's speech will not have any impact on the legal measures against him and his family. All this follows a crackdown on protesters in Tahrir Square on Friday and Saturday. 2 people died, 70 at least were injured. So, what did Mubarak say precisely? It was a pretty brief audio message in which he said the interim government's investigation into his finances was an attempt to, quote, tarnish my reputation and discredit my integrity, my stance, my political and military history, during which I worked hard for Egypt and its people in peace and in war. He went on to say, I cannot keep silent facing this continued falsified campaign and the continued attempt to undermine my reputation and the reputation of my family. Well, shortly after that statement was made, Egypt's Prosecutor General called on Mubarak and his 2 sons to appear for questioning over allegations of corruption and to be asked about the government crackdown during the revolution. So that's the premise of our discussion today, and joining us are our guests. In Cairo, we have Mustapha al-Sayyid. He's a professor of political science at Cairo University. In New York, Sharif Abdel Kouddous, correspondent for Democracy Now! Sharif was in Egypt covering the protests there. And here in Doha, we have Wael Eskandar, a columnist for Ahram Online. Gentlemen all, welcome to the programme. Good to see you here. Sharif Abdel Kouddous, first of all, you were in Egypt, as I say, covering the protests. I'm just intrigued by what you think about the manner in which Mubarak spoke when he addressed Egypt yesterday. He adopted very much a tone, I thought, of authority, more in keeping with his past in power than his present predicament under house arrest in a beach resort.
Well, I think that's exactly right. The tone and the content of his speech was keeping exactly in the form that he has spoken during the 18-day uprising. He made 3 addresses, all of which revealed how the former president, is completely disconnected from what's happening on the ground in Egypt, speaking in a tone that presuming his complete innocence and saying the charges against him are completely ridiculous. I've just received word that some people now are actually looking to possibly protest in Sharm el-Sheikh, organizing some buses to drive out to Sharm el-Sheikh and protest outside his house. One of the key demands at the beginning of this uprising was for Mubarak to be put on trial. As soon as he stepped down, people started chanting in muhakma, which means for judgment. And so I think this is a key demand, and I think many people in the pro-democracy movement are happy to see that it's moving forward.
Mustapha al-Sayyid in Cairo, you were listening to the speech there. Some described it, as I said, as condescending and clearly a kind of challenge to the military, who are not really sure how to deal with their former leader, their former boss. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I think, this is very true. The president dismissed all the charges against him, and they said that he is in pain because of what has been said about him and his family, and he ignored completely all the charges about a bank account in the name of the Alexandria Library, which is controlled by his wife. He ignored also all the charges about the business deals of his 2 sons. And at the same time also he came too late to talk about this. And many people believe that during the 60 days that passed since he left power. He had enough time to change his accounts to perhaps other banks, anyway, to hide his accounts and his property. So for this reason, I think the speech sounded unbelievable.
But did you get a sense, though? Did you get a sense? Forgive me for jumping in, but did you get a sense that he was trying to appeal to those in Egypt who may still support him, especially within the military?
Yes. Yeah, he said that what was said about him aimed at tarnishing his image and throwing doubts on his many years of service to the nation and to the army. So I think by referring to his services to the army, I think he was appealing to army officers and soldiers who might still think of him as, a hero of the October War and a former Air Force commander who deserves respect. He spoke also about, being in pain because of what was said about him. Sends a message to ordinary Egyptians who tend to sympathize with people in difficulty. He's using a tactic
let me just bring in across here to Doha. We just need to take it on a little bit. I just want to speak to Wael Eskandar here in Doha. If it's right that he was trying to address those within the military who may still support him, do you think his words will gain any traction? Do you think it'll make any difference to the movement against him?
To think about it, it might not be addressed exactly to the military, but it might be addressed for the benefit of the military. For all we know, we don't know For me, I think that it's a bit of like a staging place. Earlier on, Mubarak was not even tried for any of the shooting of protesters, and now he's trying to exonerate his name with regards to accounts and corruption. So I don't think it has any sympathy with people, and his appeal is maybe to make it legitimate, since he has his papers in order, that he might be found innocent.
Do you think a trial, would appeal to those and appease those who fear a counter-revolution may be going on in Egypt?
The trial, there are a lot of suspicions about how the trial will go, because obviously he had, according to his own statement, he had enough time to set his papers in order. So a trial at this moment, very late in the game, I'm not sure if people will be very pleased by it, or very confident that it's a trial that will bring justice.
Sharif Abdel Kouddous, it's certainly true that there has been a fair bit of time since Mubarak left office, and he may just have been able to secrete away any overseas wealth.
That's true. It remains to be seen whether his wealth has been secured away or not. But I think that this is a main demand for the protest movement. And with regard to your question about whether this is a message to the military, let's not forget that Mubarak is from the military. He's very close to these ruling generals. He appointed most of them. Field Marshal Tantawi was described in a State Department cable released by WikiLeaks as Mubarak's poodle. So there's very close ties with the ruling elite of the military and Mubarak, not so much perhaps with lower ranks. And so it's unclear what will happen with this trial, but I think a key demand is that it move forward.
Yeah, well, of course, at this point, they're only going to be speaking to Mubarak. They're only going to be asking questions, aren't they? But it's true to say that, as you said just then, that very close ties Mubarak has with the upper echelon of the military. What I'm trying to get at here is what kind of resonance it will have with those people, and can it make any difference to the way the whole thing is progressing here in Egypt, with the government bringing in reforms and so forth, or the military council bringing in reforms?
Well, I think every time Mubarak speaks, he tends to there's divisions between the pro-democracy movement. Every time he speaks, he brings people together united against him. So he's kind of the glue that holds various disparate coalitions together. And so I don't think he does himself any good whenever he gives these addresses, because it is spoken with a tone of condescension and just a lack of knowledge and connection to what's happening on the ground in Egypt. So it remains to be seen what will happen going forward, but I think there's widespread agreement that people want this to go forward and want his sons as well to be tried.
And Mustapha al-Sayyid, it's true to say that nothing short of a prosecution is going to satisfy the demonstrators.
Yes, definitely. People are not happy with the way he was treated so far. Nothing happened to him. No charges were addressed to him until this week. And it took the people who started this revolution, another big demonstration in the Tahrir Square yesterday for the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces to file charges against Mubarak related to his contribution to the corruption of political life in the country. And having gone so far, I think it would be very difficult just to stop at, filing charges against him. And since also the president did not address all the charges against him, all the stories that were reported in newspapers, I don't think people will be just satisfied by, filing charges against him and not bringing him to trial.
Okay, but Mr. al-Sayyid, do you think if a trial was to happen, that this would finally appease the people?
I think so. I think, this is the first time in the history of the country that, a head of state is brought to trial. So I think, if the trial ends by revealing some of his properties abroad and helps in restoring some of the money he took out of the country, maybe liquidating his properties abroad and transferring the proceeds to the Egyptian treasury. I think this would calm the people, but it would not be enough just to bring him to trial and not doing anything to restore what he took out of the country.
Sharif Abdel Kouddous.
What he has in Egypt.
Right. Sharif Abdel Kouddous, you have to wonder, you have to pose the question just how fair any trial might be, given how public this whole affair has been.
That's a fair point. I mean, I think a key part of this is that whether this will be a fair trial. I mean, we saw a massive turnout on Friday in Tahrir. The biggest demonstration since Mubarak stepped down on February 11th was on Friday. Tens of thousands of people flooded to the streets to call on the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces to honor the demands of the revolution. One of those demands is the prosecution of Hosni Mubarak. And we saw also the military, a few thousand people stayed overnight in Tahrir, and along with some army officers who were explicitly breaking an order by the Supreme Council not to join the protesters. And that overnight stay was very harshly broken up by the military. 2 people died, as you said in your lead, and 70 were wounded. And so I think a fair prosecution is something everyone is hoping for.
So, and Wael Eskandar, do you think that the ruling military council has been forced to act because of increasing public pressure? Is this why we suddenly had this statement yesterday from the public prosecutor?
I think the military council has been forced to act in whichever, most of the moves that is taken, and I think that public pressure for sure is giving them an initiative to actually take steps forward. How willing they are of their own accord to move forward in the direction where the people on the street want is unclear.
Right, and the thing is, where we are today is not where those who demonstrated for all those 3 weeks, 3 weeks of protests would have wanted to be right now, is it? The progress has been incredibly slow.
Yes, this is one of the main problems, that progress has been really slow, and people don't think the measures taken are adequate. When the military makes statements like they will pursue the corrupt with extreme vigor and at extreme speed, and they don't do it, it causes a problem, and this is why people are protesting. They want the justice to be delivered faster.
Mustapha al-Sayyid, I can see that
Could I just add to that point?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Well, on the point of the military, We saw today a blogger, Michael Nabil, be sentenced to 3 years in prison for criticizing the military in a military court. The verdict came down with it when his lawyers were not present. This sets a very dangerous precedent right now. This is exactly the type of behavior that we saw from the Mubarak regime, jailing and torturing bloggers. We've also seen the military. The breakup on Friday was not the first time that this has happened since Mubarak stepped down and the military came to power. They have broken up demonstrators using electric batons, beating demonstrators. They've used the Baltagaya, Mubarak's thugs, to take away demonstrators. And hundreds of people have been arrested. Dozens have been prosecuted in these military tribunals. And so I think when people talk of Egypt being reformed and you still see bloggers being sentenced in military courts, you still see protesters being beaten and being sentenced to prison, I think these are the things that people are very frustrated with the Supreme Council.
Right, and where is this coming from? Is this remnants of the former ruling NDP party?
No, I mean, the Supreme Council of Armed Forces is in charge of the country right now, and they're the ones who have ordered breaking up these demonstrations. They're the ones in rule. I mean, the thugs that they're using, these are just kind of like hired goons that have been used throughout Egypt to suppress dissent for many, many years, and we've seen the Supreme Council continuing that. And I think also it's important to remember that the ruling elite of the military, the Supreme Council, as well as the senior officers, they live a life apart from Egyptians in Egypt, a very privileged life. They live in these self-contained military compounds with they can buy foreign goods at a discount, and they have their own clubs, and they don't want these privileges touched. And so I think the main aims of the revolution are to really push for economic justice throughout Egypt. And if their privileges are threatened, then I think we'll see some significant pushback from the military while people are fighting for real reform.
Mustapha al-Sayyid in Cairo, I can see you want to come in.
Yeah, no, I wanted just to make 2 points. That the situation was very complex on Friday at the Tahrir Square. Some people claiming to be army officers, came to the Tahrir Square, and they spoke against the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. And apparently 2 or 3 of those people were dismissed from the army, and they spoke in a very strong language against the president of the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. And I think for any army, it is very difficult to allow some of its officers to go publicly and denouncing their commanders. Some military police units tried to intervene at 3 o'clock in the morning in order to arrest those officers, were surrounded by civilians who acted as a human shield. So I think it was very difficult in this situation to separate the civilians from the army officers. And this, created this sort of action by the army, which is, criticized by young people who led the revolution, and would like to hear an apology from the army for what has happened. And
all right, let me throw that across. Let me throw that across to Wael Eskandar here in Doha. What do you think about that?
No, I think that the dispersion of the protest was not specifically for that reason. I mean, the dispersing of the protests on 9th of March, and there are so many cases of tortures, and witnesses who accuse the army of torturing them, as well as the virginity checks that the army promised to investigate, but we have no word on that. So the use of violence is not a specific case to the events of Friday. It's been happening, and there are maybe 5,000. A conservative estimate would be 5,000 detainees so far.
Okay, well look, calls for investigations into Mubarak and his family are just the latest in a series of measures taken by the ruling military since his fall. He's not the only one to face potential prosecution. The military have already arrested senior members of his regime on charges of corruption and embezzlement. Last month saw a referendum on constitutional amendments that saw huge numbers of Egyptians voting in favour. And the referendum has now paved the way for both parliamentary and presidential elections later this year. Sharif Abdel Kouddous, so we can see there efforts are being made. They're trying to change a very old, a very established system. It is going to take time, and no one ever said it was going to be easy.
No, I think you're absolutely right. But I think a lot of these changes have come as a result of pressure from the pro-democracy movement. I think if you remember, right after the Supreme Council took power and Ahmed Shafiq was named Prime Minister, the Supreme Council initially said, stood by him and said Ahmed Shafiq will remain Prime Minister until some kind of elections could be held. Because of continued protests in the streets and continued calls by revolutionaries in the pro-democracy movement, Ahmed Shafiq was eventually replaced by Assam Sharaf. So I think it's important to realize that of course, the changes will take weeks, months, years, really, for Egypt to achieve real democracy and real reform. I think continued pressure from the protest movement is important because any room that's given, I think, will be taken up by remnants of the National Democratic Party and people who are not keen on seeing real change in Egypt.
Mustapha al-Sayyid, just let's put it simplistically, how much will do you think there is in the army to see these reforms come through? Do you think it's 90%, 80%, 50%? To what degree do you think the army is behind the movement?
I think it is wrong to conceive the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces as, just committed to maintaining Mubarak's regime. Some of the constitutional amendments were even suggested by Mubarak himself, and the army from the very beginning, I think, took the side of the revolution. So I don't think the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces is just acting under the pressure of the young people and the people who support the revolution. I think the difference between the Supreme Council and the revolutionary leaders is that the Supreme Council would like a peaceful, gradual, progressive, transfer of power to an elected government. But it would like to do this within the period of 6 months. Now, it has been almost obliged to extend this period. But I think, the pace of reform, the preferred pace of reform for the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces is much slower than that of the revolutionary groups.
Okay,
and
I need to move it on because we're just coming. We've just got a couple of minutes left on the program. I'm very sorry to jump in there, but we need to pass it on to Wael Eskandar here in Doha. Well, what about this warning by the likes of Amir Musa and Mohammed El-Baradei, saying that it really is the remnants of this collapsed regime that are trying to drive a wedge between the army and the people?
If there is evidence, I'd like to see it. But so far, all these, this is the same strategy. Like after the battle with the camels, where they said that there are probably some people who are trying to put a wedge between people and Mubarak.
Okay, Mustapha in Cairo, just very briefly, just 30 seconds, if you will.
No, I think definitely there are people who belong to the National Democratic Party who are trying to widen the gap between the military and the revolutionary people. And a prominent leader of the National Democratic Party was arrested yesterday, and he is the one who called for the demonstration on Wednesday, February the 2nd. So I think this claim that there are people belonging to the NDP who are trying to sabotage the revolution, I think, is well established now by the arrest of Ibrahim Kamil, by also the revelations of the preparations for spreading disorder in the country in order to discredit the
We've just got a minute left. I want to hand it over to Sharif Abdel Kouddous in New York. They said that the revolution was victorious because of solidarity between the people and the military. Where's that solidarity now in your view? Just in 45 seconds.
Well, look, I think the military acted in a way that helped the revolution, but let's not forget, on the day of the so-called Battle of the Camel, they just did stand by and allow Mubarak's forces to come in and attack the protesters. So I think it's a delicate relationship, and it's one that going forward, I think we'll have to see how it develops. But the most important thing, I think, is once a civilian government is achieved in Egypt, if anything threatens kind of the privileges of the military or threatens its $1.4 billion in foreign aid from the United States, I think then we might see some significant pushback from the army, which has been the backbone of power in Egypt for 60 years now.
All right, thanks very much indeed. Gentlemen, indeed, thank you to you all. Mustapha al-Sayyid in Cairo, in New York, Sharif Abdel Kouddous, and here in Doha, Wael Eskandar. Thanks very much, and thank you very much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. Always, of course, keen to hear from you. Delighted to get your emails. Just send them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me, Nick Clark. Bye for now.